For most men at 85, life becomes quiet, 0.033 seconds routine, and unremarkable. But David Allan Coe was never like most men. He was the outlaw that Nashville could not tame, the songwriter who refused to polish his truth, and the prisoner who turned his scars into songs. 0.1111 seconds now, after decades of silence, he is speaking louder than ever before. And the story he's telling is not just about music. It is about betrayal, erasure, and revenge against the very institution that tried to bury his name forever. 0.2727 seconds, a childhood already lost. 0.3939 seconds. David Allan County was born on September 6, 1939 in Akron, Ohio, a city better known for factories and rubber than for producing country legends. His beginnings were far from hopeful. By the age of 9, he had already been sent to reform school. What followed was a cycle of confinement, juvenile homes, reformatory schools, and eventually full-fledged prisons. To some, these were just statistics of a troubled child, but to Coe, they were the shaping forces of his defiance. Life never handed him a soft landing. His father remarried, and his stepmother made it clear he was unwanted. The rejection cut deep. She kept his sister, but demanded he be turned over to the courts. From that point forward, Coe's world was one of survival, not nurture. At Star Commonwealth for Boys in Albion, Michigan, he was beaten with paddles until his hands bled. He ran away, stole cars, was caught, and thrown deeper into the system. Yet within those walls, something stirred. Inmates knew him as the one who could sing. He won talent shows inside prison the way Elvis won over audiences outside. Behind bars, he began to write songs, raw, unfiltered, and drenched in pain. Later, he would call them his prison gospel, verses born not of polished Nashville polish, but of desperation and rhythm from concrete cells. He even claimed to have spent time on death row for killing an inmate who tried to assault him. Though that claim has always been disputed, what cannot be denied is that prison carved him into a man unlike any Nashville had ever seen. By the time he was released in the 1960s, he wasn't just another ex-con. He was a storm carrying a guitar, a notebook of lyrics, and a permanent grudge against authority. Breaking into Nashville and the rise of an outlaw. 2:43 2 minutes 43 seconds. When David Allan Coe arrived in Nashville in the late 1960s, he didn't come looking for permission or approval. He drove a hearse, parked it outside the Ryman Auditorium, and lived out of it. 2:56 2 minutes 56 seconds. To the music industry, he was nothing more than another drifter on the fringe, but he refused to be ignored. He walked the alleys of Music Row, guitar in hand, daring anyone to look away. It didn't take long before his words forced people to notice. In 1973, Tanya Tucker recorded Would You Lay With Me? In a Field of Stone, a ballad so haunting, intimate, and raw that it went straight to #1. Suddenly, the industry had to acknowledge the man who wrote it. But what they saw terrified them. Coe wasn't the polished cowboy in clean boots. He was tattooed, long-haired, unpredictable, and unwilling to play their game. While Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were being celebrated for testing the boundaries of country music, Coe was already past them, writing songs that pushed into territory Nashville didn't dare touch. His early records, Penitentiary Blues in 1969 and later Requiem for a Harlequin, were unlike anything else on the airwaves. They were psychedelic, violent, sometimes disturbing, but they were his truth. And that truth resonated. Bikers, ex-cons, misfits, and wanderers bought his albums and filled his shows. They didn't just see him as a performer. They saw him as one of their own. Coe wasn't giving them entertainment. He was giving them proof that someone was willing to sing the life they lived. But Nashville wanted stars they could polish, package, and control. Coe refused every one of those boxes. He mocked the industry by donning rhinestone suits, a Lone Ranger mask, and calling himself the mysterious rhinestone cowboy. Where others begged for a shot at the Grand Ole Opry, he taunted it with long-haired redneck in 1976 and You Never Even Called Me By My Name. The latter co-written with Steve Goodman. Coe mocked the very rules of country songwriting, exposing its formulas while making fans laugh and sing along. It was rebellion set to music. And while Jennings, Nelson, and Chris Christopherson earned their place on magazine covers and Opie stages, Coe was carving out a separate kingdom. He didn't need their spotlight. He had already found his own fire, the blacklist and silent eraser by the Opry. For most country musicians, An invitation to the Grand Opry was the Holy Grail. It was the stage that turned singers into legends, the validation that meant Nashville had accepted you into its circle. But for David Allan Coe, that door was bolted shut from the very beginning. In over 60 years of performing, he was never invited to stand on that stage. Not as a guest, not as a member, not even for a single song. The official reasons were never made public, but the whispers grew louder as the years passed. Some pointed to his prison record, others to the Confederate flag guitar that Dimag Darrell of Panta had gifted him. Many said it was his controversial lyrics, often crude, sometimes offensive, always unfiltered. But insiders revealed a darker truth. Coe wasn't just overlooked. He was deliberately erased. Former Opry associates told stories of a meeting in the late 1970s where Coe clashed with a powerful figure behind the scenes. Voices were raised, glass was broken, and when it ended, he was told he'd never step on that stage again. Other rumors suggested that he stumbled too close to scandals Nashville wanted buried. An affair involving a rising female star and a married executive, or financial documents hinting at chart-try rigging and under-the-table payouts that mysteriously disappeared after a studio break-in. Whatever the real story, the result was the same. Coe's name vanished from Opry programs. Radio stations stopped playing his records. Award shows ignored him completely. Booking agents pulled out of contracts without explanation. Even documentaries featuring his peers often pretended he didn't exist. It wasn't just rejection. It was execution without a funeral. And yet Coe's music never stopped. He toured relentlessly, often in rowdy bars, biker rallies, and outlaw festivals where his fans welcomed him as royalty. His concerts were unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, but always real. While Nashville stars sang clean on television, Coe was pouring out every scar and grudge to audiences who saw through the industry's polish. The establishment wanted him invisible. Instead, he became myth. To the industry, he was a problem. To the people, he was a prophet. And the deeper Nashville buried him, the stronger his legend grew underground. The secrets he kept and the evidence he saved. By the time David Allan Coe reached his 70s, many assumed the battle was over. Nashville had erased his name from the books, and the Opry had carried on without ever acknowledging him. But Coe was patient. He had lived through reform schools, prisons, and decades on the road. Silence was nothing new. What no one realized was that he had been keeping receipts the entire time. For years, Coe hinted at knowing things that could ruin powerful men. He had told friends about letters, recordings, even photographs that he kept locked away. Most dismissed these stories as the tall tales of an outlaw. But in 2025, at 85 years old, the world finally saw he hadn't been bluffing. In a leaked podcast recording, Coe spoke for nearly 2 hours, calm and deliberate, cigarette in one hand, papers in the other. He didn't rant, he recited. He named executives who blackmailed him. He read from a yellowed handwritten letter allegedly penned by a former OPRY board member apologizing for being part of the machine that blacklisted you and referencing a broken deal in 1981. He played a scratchy voice memo in which a now-deceased country star warned him to stay quiet about a bathhouse party involving industry elites or risk ending up in the river like the others. Even more disturbing, Coe described walking backstage in 1977 and witnessing what he called a sickening transaction involving a minor and an Opry official. He admitted he never went to police, fearing he'd be silenced permanently, but he told 2 friends. One of them later died under suspicious circumstances in the early 2000s. For decades, Coe carried that memory like a curse. Skeptics dismissed it all as fantasy, but for others, the pieces aligned too neatly with rumors Nashville had buried for years. And Coe, for the first time, had documents to back it up. He claimed he had kept tapes, contracts, and photos hidden for protection. Evidence he never planned to use unless they came for him. But now, with nothing left to lose, he decided to bring it all forward piece by piece. What began as whispers of a bitter outlaw transformed into a storm, and Nashville, which once believed it had buried Coe, was about to be dragged into the light he had been saving for half a century. The interview leak and the firestorm that followed. The interview that unleashed decades of rage wasn't meant to be public. It was filmed quietly on Coe's Tennessee property. Just him, a trusted journalist, and a small crew. What began as a casual conversation soon spiraled into one of the most explosive revelations in country music history. For nearly 2 hours, David Allan Coe unloaded everything he had carried in silence. The names, the letters, the threats, and the betrayals that had shadowed his career. He spoke slowly without theatrics, his voice calm but heavy with finality. At one point, he leaned into the microphone and whispered, "You want to know why I was banned from the Opie? Because I knew too much. Because I wouldn't play along. Because I caught one of their own doing something that would have destroyed them. And now I'm done protecting them." The room fell silent after those words. There was no music, no editing, just truth hanging in the air like a loaded gun. That video was never meant to escape the room. But once leaked online, there was no stopping it. Within days, TikTok clips of CO's most shocking lines spread like wildfire. YouTube lit up with reaction videos. Country music forums exploded with debates. Fans dissecting every sentence and demanding answers. Younger audiences, many who had only heard of Coe as a fringe outlaw, suddenly wanted to know why his name had been erased for so long. The establishment scrambled. The Opry released a carefully worded statement about honoring tradition and refusing to comment on unverified claims, but silence spoke louder than denial. Country radio ignored the story entirely. Big-name stars, especially long-time Opry members, stayed quiet. Not one tweet, not one public defense. It was as if they were all waiting to see just how much Coe was willing to reveal.